10 confrontations shaped by accidents, misunderstandings, and unlikely objectives. This countdown moves from number 10 to number 1, with each archive leading into the next. We begin with Pig War, 1859, one of history's strangest conflicts. The Pig War was a confrontation in 1859 between the United States and the United Kingdom over the British U.S. border in the San Juan Islands, between Vancouver Island, present-day Canada, and the Washington Territory, present-day state of Washington. The Pig War, so called because it was triggered by the shooting of a pig, is also called the Pig Episode, the Pig and Potato War, the San Juan Boundary Dispute, and the Northwestern Boundary Dispute. Despite being referred to as a war, there were no human casualties on either side. The unlikely confrontation at Pig War, 1859, leads to Lobster War, another conflict made stranger by how it began. At number 9, Lobster War, one of history's strangest conflicts. The Lobster War, also known as the Lobster Operation, Portuguese, Guerra de Lagosta, French, Conflit de la Langouste, was a dispute over spiny lobsters that occurred from 1961 to 1963 between Brazil and France. The Brazilian government refused to allow French fishing vessels to catch spiny lobsters 100 miles (160 kilometers) off Brazil's northeastern coast by arguing that lobsters crawl along the continental shelf. The French maintained that lobsters swim, and so they could be caught by any fishing vessel from any country. The unlikely confrontation at Lobster War leads to Battle of Los Angeles, another conflict made stranger by how it began. At number 8, Battle of Los Angeles, one of history's strangest conflicts. The Battle of Los Angeles, also known as the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, is the name given by contemporary sources to a rumored attack on the continental United States by Imperial Japan and the subsequent anti-aircraft artillery barrage which took place from late February 24 to early February 25, 1942, over Los Angeles, California. 5 civilians died during the barrage and 4 Japanese aircraft were erroneously reported shot down. The incident occurred less than 3 months after the U.S. entered World War II in response to the Imperial Japanese Navy's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, and 1 day after the bombardment of Elwood near Santa Barbara on the 23rd of February. The unlikely confrontation at Battle of Los Angeles leads to Operation Cottage, another conflict made stranger by how it began. At number 7, Operation Cottage, one of history's strangest conflicts. Operation Cottage was a joint American-Canadian plan to complete the recapture of the Aleutian Islands from the Japanese in 1943. Allied military forces landed on Kiska Island, which had been occupied by Japanese forces since June 1942. However, the Japanese had secretly abandoned the island 2 weeks earlier, and so the Allied landings were unopposed. Allied forces suffered over 500 casualties during the operation from Japanese mines and booby traps, friendly fire incidents, and vehicle accidents. Its importance comes from the surviving evidence and the way later researchers reconstructed what happened. The unlikely confrontation at Operation Cottage leads to Panmunjom axe murder incident, another conflict made stranger by how it began. At number 6, Panmunjom axe murder incident, one of history's strangest conflicts. The Panmunjom axe murder incident, Korean, also known as the Korean Axe Atrocity Incident, was the killing of 2 United Nations command officers, Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett, by North Korean soldiers on August 18, 1976, in the Joint Security Area, JSA, in the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ. The officers, from the United States Army, had been part of a work party trimming a poplar tree in the JSA. 3 days later, US and South Korean forces launched Operation Paul Bunyan, an operation that cut down the tree with a show of force to intimidate North Korea into backing down, which it did. North Korea then accepted responsibility for the earlier killings. The unlikely confrontation at Panmunjom axe murder incident leads to Raid on the Medway, another conflict made stranger by how it began. At number 5, Raid on the Medway, one of history's strangest conflicts. The Raid on the Medway, during the Second Anglo-Dutch War between the 12th of June to the 14th of June 1667, was a successful attack conducted by the Dutch Navy on English warships laid up in the fleet anchorages off Chatham Dockyard and Gillingham in the county of Kent. At the time, the fortress of Upnor Castle and a barrier chain called the Gillingham Line were supposed to protect the English ships. Its importance comes from the surviving evidence and the way later researchers reconstructed what happened. The unlikely confrontation at raid on the Medway leads to Battle of Castle Itter, another conflict made stranger by how it began. At number 4, Battle of Castle Itter, one of history's strangest conflicts. The Battle of Castle Itter was fought on the 5th of May 1945, in the Austrian village of Itter in the North Tyrol region of the country, during the last days of the European theatre of World War II. Troops of the 23rd Tank Battalion of the 12th Armored Division of the US XXI Corps led by Lieutenant John C. Jack Lee Jr., a number of Wehrmacht soldiers led by Major Joseph Sepp Gangl, SS Hauptsturmführer Kurt Siegfried Schrader, and recently freed French prisoners of war defended Castle Itter against an attacking force from the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division until relief from the American 142nd Infantry Regiment of the 36th Division of XXI Corps arrived. The unlikely confrontation at Battle of Castle Itter leads to Battle of Brisbane, another conflict made stranger by how it began. At number 3, Battle of Brisbane, one of history's strangest conflicts. The Battle of Brisbane was a riot with United States military personnel on one side and Australian servicemen and civilians on the other, in Brisbane, Queensland's capital city, on the 26th and the 27th of November 1942, during which time the two nations were allies. By the time the violence had been quelled, one Australian soldier was dead and hundreds of Australians and US servicemen were injured. News reports of the incident were suppressed in the United States and subject to wartime censorship in Australia, with local and interstate newspapers prohibited from mentioning the reasons behind the riot in their reports of the event. The unlikely confrontation at Battle of Brisbane leads to Whiskey War, another conflict made stranger by how it began. At number 2, Whiskey War, one of history's strangest conflicts. The Whiskey War, also known as the Liquor Wars, was an amicable border dispute between the Kingdom of Denmark and Canada over Hans Island. Between 1973 and 2022, the island was under dispute between the two nations, although never in direct conflict or violence. Both countries agreed on a process in 2005 to resolve the issue, which was finally settled in 2022, resulting in the creation of a land border on the island between the two states. Its importance comes from the surviving evidence and the way later researchers reconstructed what happened. The unlikely confrontation at Whiskey War leads to War of Jenkins Ear, another conflict made stranger by how it began. At number 1, War of Jenkins Ear, one of history's strangest conflicts. The War of Jenkins Ear was fought between Great Britain and Spain from 1739 to 1748. Most of the fighting took place in New Granada and the Caribbean Sea, with major operations over by 1742. It is considered a related conflict of the 1740 to 1748 War of the Austrian Succession. The name derives from Robert Jenkins, a British sea captain whose ear was allegedly severed in April 1731 by Spanish Coast Guards searching his ship for contraband. In 1738, opposition politicians in the British Parliament used the incident to incite support for a war against Spain. That was top 10 strangest conflicts in history. Every story in this countdown began as a shorter archive, but the connections only appear when the files are placed together. Subscribe for the next collection.